A major Ron DeSantis super PAC is already beginning to wind down their support, signaling that we may be nearing the end for Mr. Ron DeSantis. So here is the headline from NBC News here. Pro Ron DeSantis super PAC ends door knocking in Nevada and Super Tuesday states. So this is the same super PAC. Their name is Never Back Down, which is hilarious. But this is the same PAC that had that memo that was out that I covered that urged DeSantis to hammer Ramaswamy during the debate while defending Trump. So already at this point, they're signaling that we don't have all that much trust in you, considering we don't want you to go after the guy who was clearly in first place. And now it's even clear that they are not all that confident in their chosen candidate. So Never Back Down, the super PAC backing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign, has ceased its door-knocking operations in Nevada, home to a key early nominating contest, and California, a delegate-rich Super Tuesday state, officials confirmed Wednesday. They added that in recent weeks, the group also ended its field operations in North Carolina and Texas, two additional states that vote on Super Tuesday in March. Never Back Down had pitched a wide-ranging canvassing effort throughout the early nominating states as the centerpiece of its effort to help boost DeSantis in the primary, even letting reporters inside its door-knocking boot camp in Iowa, where it trained hundreds of canvassers earlier this year. The Super PAC had planned to spend $100 million on the effort. So I'm going to get to how much they've spent already, and surprisingly got very close to this number. But this is just, think of the amount of time, effort, and money wasted on this candidate that clearly from the start does not know how to perform. When it comes to attracting Republican voters, you need to have charisma. You need to have, forget the policies, because clearly Republicans do not care about that shit. But you, at the very least, need to have personality. Trump has personality. That's why he's so far ahead, despite his obvious illegality, his obvious corruption, his obvious lies. It doesn't matter because he can be funny sometimes. And that's all voters on that side apparently care about, at least when it comes to the base. So DeSantis has been a complete waste of time. And now the Super PAC is saying that we want to reinvest in the first three states. That's from Aaron Perrin, a spokesperson for the Super PAC, told NBC News, nodding to Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina and noting that it is ramping up its spending on advertising. We see real opportunities in the first three. The first three are to set the conditions for the March states. Which, this strategy would have made more sense initially, but when they had already invested in the Super Tuesday states to now pull funding away from that, shows you a clear lack of confidence there, because you want to be able to have people on the ground. You want to have the operations in those states that follow the initial states. You want to have that stuff ready as soon as the first states are done. If you don't have the confidence that your candidate is even going to make it past the first couple states, then that doesn't bode well for the entirety of this campaign. And responding to, this is hilarious, from the Trump campaign, responding to NBC News report, Chris LaCivita, a senior advisor to Trump's campaign, mocked the Super PAC as ABD, or always back down, adding that the move by the pro-DeSantis allies show they are realizing what we have known all along and is borne out every day in another poll. Donald Trump is the overwhelming pick of Republicans across the country to take on and defeat President Joe Biden. No amount of charts and darts and fancy sales pitches pushed by ABD's long list of Super PAC consultants will change that, he added. It's hilarious to see them just attacking the Super PAC, considering this is the same PAC that advised DeSantis to defend Trump. But they know how to play hardball. This is one thing about the Trump campaign. Like, they know politics. They know how to play voters. They understand what their voters like. They play to the base. Trump does that well. He does it really through, again, his personality. But even the way they campaign, the way they talk about other candidates, they don't back down. And that has been very effective for Donald Trump. Just as they aren't being humble here at all about being in first. Oftentimes you see politicians generally, when they're in first, they don't want to be too bragging about it. They tend to be, more humble, or they tend to ignore other candidates. That's a big one as well. But here they're just straight up going after DeSantis, his pack here, and they don't care. They're attacking it. They're reveling in all this, and it's going to. I mean, it works for them. And this is the amount of money that pack has burned through. So the Never Back Down pack, $34 million. This is as of August 1st. So I'm sure more since then. So their goal, of course, as I showed you earlier, was going to be $100 million spent on DeSantis. They already burned through $34 million by the end of July. And what did that get them? DeSantis here, the pink line, only losing support since announcing. So before he announced back here, in January, February, March, he had pretty close to Trump in terms of, polling. Then DeSantis announced around the end of March, or maybe it was the end of April. But regardless, since then has only lost support. And he's now sitting at 14.8% to Trump at 50.3%, and Ramaswamy right behind DeSantis at 9.2%. All of that money got him less support. It does. There's a couple of questions that come out of this. Is how effective is money really? At least when it comes to a Republican race, when you have somebody who is already the former president, there's that built-in support there, obviously, but also just the personality that Trump has. No one else in the race compares to it. The other question I have is, how terrible is the Florida Democratic Party? DeSantis clearly is not a good candidate. How did he win? Seeing how clearly beatable he is, not to mention the actual impact of Ron DeSantis and his policies, be it on, we could talk about the impact when it comes to, and I have, around issues of human rights, around LGBTQ rights, around trans rights, but also generally a major one, housing. I've covered this in past videos. Florida is now since DeSantis took over, one of the absolute worst places for housing, one of the most unaffordable places to live. Despite, climate change bearing down on that state, destroying properties, it is still it's become one of the most unaffordable places to live compared to increases in housing costs in other states. He's not only a terrible politician in the traditional sense of, performance, but he's also just terrible when it comes to actually helping anybody. So those two things combined makes him, I think, a very beatable candidate in the next race. Democrats should maybe, invest a little more in Florida. Try to do something there. Don't just give the state up. And especially don't rely on, corporate Democrats. You have to actually speak to working class voters. When you have, a housing issue in Florida, Democrats should be able to speak to that. DeSantis is definitely beatable based on what we have seen of him. He's not a good politician. But how much longer does this campaign have? Is he even going to make it to the early states? My feeling right now with all these candidates really is that they're just waiting to see if Trump is actually going to make it to the general election. And they're just all sticking around in the hopes that Trump is either, behind bars, and maybe that prevents him from running, though it might not prevent him from running, or, maybe a health issue or something they're hoping for to happen. I think they're all just sort of waiting to see what's going to happen with Trump. I would hope at this point they realize they can't beat him one-on-one, but if something were to happen legally or anything else, that they want to be there to swoop in and take those voters. But even in that scenario, I tend to think you're going to lose a lot of MAGA voters, hardcore Republican voters in a general, if Trump isn't on the ballot. And by contrast, you're going to lose a lot of people who may have voted Republican if it wasn't Trump. But Republicans are in a tough position because either way, I think they're going to have a bit of a turnout issue. Having a criminal on the ballot, not a great way to get swing voters, I would imagine. But at the same time, Trump is their biggest draw. So if Trump isn't there, you may lose a lot of typical Republican voters in a general. But this is all far off. Hard to know. But I want your thoughts on DeSantis. Do you think he's going to drop out before voting even starts or after the first few states? Or do you think he'll ride this out and hope for Trump to simply go away?